Listen to this with a steady breath and an open mind. What you are about to hear may challenge what you have been told for years, but it is not meant to frighten you or harden you. It is meant to give you clarity. Many men carry a quiet pain they cannot explain, a subtle tension in the chest, a feeling that something is off, even when everything looks fine on the surface. That feeling is often dismissed as insecurity or overthinking, but very often it is your nervous system responding to a psychological shift that no one ever taught you how to recognize. Here is the truth: most men are never told clearly. In today's world, betrayal rarely begins with a dramatic moment. It almost never starts with a hotel room or a sudden confession. It begins silently, internally, long before anything physical happens. And because it is quiet, it catches good men off guard. Many people believe cheating is about opportunity or dissatisfaction alone. That belief is incomplete. What actually happens is far more subtle and far more psychological. In many modern relationships, emotional boundaries are weakened long before physical ones are crossed. This is not about you being inadequate, boring, or unworthy. It is about how emotional attention works on the human brain, especially in an environment saturated with validation, novelty, and constant access to other people. When a man cheats, it is often impulsive and physical. It tends to be short-sighted and compartmentalized. When a woman drifts toward cheating, it usually starts emotionally. Not because women are worse or better, but because emotional connection plays a different role in how many women experience attachment and desire. This process is gradual. It often begins when emotional energy starts flowing away from the relationship and toward an external source. This does not require bad intentions. It does not require hatred or cruelty. It often begins during moments of stress, boredom, self-doubt, or emotional fatigue. A woman feels unseen, not necessarily because you failed to see her, but because she has not learned how to regulate her need for reassurance internally. Instead of addressing that discomfort directly, her attention drifts outward. And in today's world, emotional attention is always available. A message arrives at the right moment. A compliment lands when she feels vulnerable. A conversation feels light and effortless compared to the responsibilities of real partnership. None of this feels dangerous at first. It feels harmless, it feels like relief, but psychologically, something important is happening beneath the surface. Her brain begins associating emotional comfort and stimulation with someone outside the relationship. This is where most men get blindsided. They assume cheating begins with secrecy. In reality, it begins with emotional availability. Once emotional energy is redirected, loyalty begins to weaken quietly. There is no alarm bell, no obvious betrayal, just a slow shift in where her emotional nourishment comes from. The modern environment makes this process easier than ever. Social platforms, messaging apps, and workplace proximity create endless opportunities for low-effort emotional stimulation. The brain is not designed to handle unlimited novelty without discipline. Dopamine, the chemical linked to motivation and reward, does not distinguish between healthy connection and unhealthy attachment. It simply responds to what feels good and new. When someone lacks emotional self-awareness, they mistake stimulation for connection. Validation starts to feel like intimacy. Attention feels like being understood. And because nothing physical has happened yet, the mind minimizes the risk. It tells itself a story that everything is still innocent. But internally, emotional loyalty is already shifting. And once that shift happens, boundaries become softer. The conscience grows quieter. What once felt inappropriate now feels justified. This is not because you changed. It is because her internal reference point has moved. Many men are taught to look inward immediately when something feels wrong. They ask themselves what they did wrong, what they failed to provide, how they can fix it. Self-reflection is healthy, but misplaced self-blame is not. A woman who is emotionally mature communicates discomfort early. She addresses restlessness before it becomes distance. She does not outsource her emotional regulation to another person. When emotional drifting happens, it is not a sign that you are not enough. It is a sign that she did not know how to sit with her own discomfort without escaping into validation. That distinction matters deeply for your mental health. There is another layer most men never hear. When emotional loyalty begins to shift, the person drifting often rewrites the relationship internally to reduce guilt. This happens unconsciously. The mind searches for justification. Small flaws become magnified. Neutral moments are reinterpreted as neglect. The narrative changes not because reality changed, but because the mind needs consistency between behavior and self-image. This is why emotional withdrawal often feels confusing. On the surface, things seem normal, but the warmth is gone. The softness fades. You feel tolerated rather than chosen. That is not imagination. That is your nervous system noticing a change in emotional presence. Men tend to love in a linear way. Commitment means direction. Loyalty feels default. When you choose someone, your emotional energy stays focused. That is why emotional drift in a partner feels destabilizing. You are still standing in the same place while the emotional ground beneath you shifts. This process does not make someone evil. It makes them emotionally undisciplined. And emotional discipline is not taught nearly enough. Many people grow up learning how to chase feelings, but not how to manage them. When restlessness appears, they interpret it as a signal to seek something new rather than to understand what is missing internally. As this drift continues, subtle behavioral changes often emerge. Increased privacy around the phone, less curiosity about you, more defensiveness when asked simple questions. These behaviors are not random, they are protective. The mind is defending a source of emotional reward. At this stage, confusion often intensifies. You try harder, you communicate more, you offer solutions, but the issue is no longer logistical or relational. It is internal, and no amount of effort can compete with a fantasy that requires no responsibility. This is the most important thing to absorb early. You cannot love someone into emotional integrity. You cannot sacrifice enough to stabilize someone who avoids self-examination. And trying to do so only teaches your nervous system to associate love with anxiety. Understanding this is not about becoming bitter or suspicious. It is about reclaiming clarity. Awareness protects you from self-abandonment. When you stop interpreting another person's emotional drift as proof of your inadequacy, your nervous system can finally relax. This is where your power begins, not in controlling outcomes, but in understanding patterns, not in fixing others, but in staying grounded in your own worth. Emotional maturity recognizes that loyalty is a skill, not a feeling. And not everyone has developed that skill. Pause here, let this settle. This understanding is not meant to harden you, it is meant to steady you. When you are ready, we will continue deeper into how this psychological process unfolds and how you protect your emotional well-being without losing your openness or humanity. Now let's continue calmly and clearly, because this is where understanding turns into emotional protection. When emotional drifting deepens, something important happens inside the person who is drifting. Their inner world begins to split. On one side is the image of being a loyal partner. On the other side is the emotional excitement and validation they are receiving elsewhere. Holding these two realities at the same time creates psychological tension. The mind does not like tension, so it resolves it by changing the story. This is when subtle rewriting begins. The relationship starts to feel heavier in her mind, not because it suddenly became unhealthy, but because it now competes with a fantasy. Reality always loses to fantasy because fantasy demands nothing. It has no bills, no disagreements, no compromises, no accountability. It only delivers emotional reward on demand. As this internal shift grows, her behavior may feel inconsistent. Some days she seems affectionate, other days distant. Some moments she seeks reassurance, other moments she pushes you away. This inconsistency is not manipulation in the beginning, it is confusion. She is regulating guilt, desire, fear, and validation all at once. Over time, that confusion becomes exhausting, and instead of resolving it honestly, she externalizes it. This is where projection begins. You become labeled as distant, controlling, boring, or emotionally unavailable. These labels often appear suddenly and feel disconnected from reality. That is because they are not assessments of you. They are psychological tools her mind uses to justify emotional distance. If you become the problem, then her behavior feels less wrong. Men are especially vulnerable at this stage because they are solution-oriented. You listen to the criticism and try to improve. You adjust, you explain, you give more. But the issue is no longer about improvement. It is about permission. Her mind is slowly giving itself permission to detach. Another important factor here is emotional reinforcement. Every emotionally charged interaction outside the relationship releases dopamine. Dopamine strengthens attachment pathways. The brain learns quickly. It begins craving the ease of that interaction. Meanwhile, interactions within the relationship may feel more effortful because they carry history, responsibility, and expectation. This creates a dangerous contrast. The outside connection feels light and energizing. The real relationship feels serious and demanding. Again, this does not mean the relationship is broken. It means her emotional regulation has shifted outward. And once that happens, intimacy at home often declines because emotional energy is finite. At this stage, many men sense something but doubt themselves. They tell themselves they are imagining it. They do not want to seem insecure. They suppress intuition. But intuition is not paranoia. It is pattern recognition. Your body often detects emotional absence before your mind accepts it. As emotional distance grows, secrecy often increases. Not always obvious secrecy, but selective transparency. Details are omitted. Questions are deflected. The phone becomes guarded not because of hatred toward you, but because of attachment to the emotional reward source. Anything that threatens that reward feels like a threat to emotional regulation. Here is a critical truth that protects your mental health. Once someone begins lying to themselves, honesty with others becomes very difficult. Self-deception always precedes interpersonal deception. If she tells herself that nothing wrong is happening, that she deserves this attention, that you are partly to blame, then lying feels justified rather than immoral. This is why emotional cheating does not feel like cheating to the person at first. There is no clear line crossed in their mind. Only feelings followed. But feelings are not neutral guides. Without boundaries, feelings become impulses. Modern culture reinforces this confusion. Messages like follow your truth and do what makes you happy sound empowering, but without emotional discipline, they become excuses for avoidance. Happiness becomes something to chase externally instead of something to build internally. Accountability feels restrictive instead of grounding. At this point, many men experience a drop in self-worth. They question their attractiveness, competence, and masculinity. This is deeply damaging and deeply unnecessary. Someone else's emotional instability does not reflect your value. It reflects their capacity to tolerate discomfort without escaping. A grounded partner addresses restlessness through communication. An emotionally mature partner speaks before drifting. They do not build secret emotional refuges. They understand that long-term connection requires emotional responsibility, not constant stimulation. When drifting continues unchecked, internal boundaries erode further. Guilt fades. Rationalization strengthens. This is the point where physical betrayal becomes possible, not because of sudden desire, but because the emotional groundwork has already been laid. By the time something physical happens, the relationship has often been emotionally over for a while. Understanding this timeline matters because it removes the shock. Betrayal rarely comes out of nowhere. It comes from ignored emotional shifts, internal justifications, and unaddressed restlessness. Recognizing this pattern does not mean you control it. It means you stop being confused by it. Here is where your agency returns. You cannot prevent someone from choosing distraction over depth. But you can refuse to internalize blame for choices that were never yours. You can stop overfunctioning in response to someone else's emotional withdrawal. You can remain self-respecting even in uncertainty. One of the most painful lessons for men is accepting that effort does not guarantee loyalty. Integrity is not created by how much you give. It is revealed by how someone manages temptation. Loyalty is not proven during easy times. It is revealed during moments of restlessness. If you feel that quiet ache, the sense that something is missing, honor it. Do not panic, do not accuse, do not abandon yourself. Awareness is not weakness. It is the beginning of emotional safety. Take another breath here. The goal is not to become guarded or suspicious. The goal is to remain clear, grounded, and self-respecting. In the final part, we will talk about what this understanding means for your healing, your boundaries, and your future connections. without bitterness, without fear, and without losing your capacity to love. Now we come to the most important part, because this is where understanding becomes healing. Everything you have heard so far is not meant to make you cynical or closed off. It is meant to return you to yourself. When someone drifts emotionally or betrays a relationship, the deepest wound is not the loss of the person, it is the loss of safety inside your own mind. You begin questioning your judgment, your worth, and your ability to trust. That is the real injury, and that is what needs care. When a woman crosses emotional or physical boundaries, something fundamental changes inside her as well. She enters a state of emotional fragmentation. She becomes one version of herself with you, another version with the person who feeds her validation, and a third version inside her own thoughts, trying to hold these contradictions together. This fragmentation is exhausting. It requires constant mental effort to maintain. And while she may appear free or empowered on the surface, internally there is tension, confusion, and unresolved guilt, even if she refuses to acknowledge it. This is why betrayal does not lead to peace for the person who commits it. It leads to more disconnection. But this is not your burden to carry. Your responsibility is not to rescue someone from their inner conflict. Your responsibility is to protect your own emotional integrity. One of the hardest truths to accept is that you cannot compete with fantasy. Fantasy has no weight. It demands no patience, no consistency, no accountability. Real love does. Real connection includes boredom, routine, disagreement, and growth. When someone chooses fantasy over reality, they are choosing stimulation over substance. That choice reflects their readiness, not your worth. Healing begins when you stop asking why you were not enough and start asking healthier questions. Questions like, why did I tolerate emotional ambiguity for so long? Why did I ignore my intuition? Where did I abandon my own needs to preserve the connection? These questions are not self-blaming. They are self-reclaiming. Your nervous system deserves stability. When emotional inconsistency becomes chronic, it creates anxiety, hypervigilance, and self-doubt. Over time, this can affect sleep, concentration, motivation, and even physical health. Chronic emotional stress increases cortisol, which impacts immunity, digestion, and cardiovascular health. This is why emotional clarity is not just psychological, it is physiological. Protecting your emotional boundaries protects your body as well. This is where boundaries become acts of self-care rather than punishment. A boundary is not an ultimatum. It is a statement of what you require to remain emotionally present. It sounds like honesty, consistency, and mutual respect. When those are missing, the healthiest response is not to chase, but to pause and observe. A partner who values the relationship will respond to boundaries with curiosity and effort. A partner who is already drifting will respond with defensiveness or minimization. This response gives you information. You do not need to argue with it. You simply need to listen. Trust is rebuilt not through reassurance, but through congruence. Words must match behavior. Emotional presence must be consistent. Without this alignment, the mind stays unsettled. And you deserve a relationship that calms your nervous system, not one that keeps it in survival mode. It is also important to release the idea that betrayal diminishes you. It does not. It clarifies. It reveals who is capable of depth and who is still chasing feelings to avoid themselves. You did not lose your value. You gained information. As you heal, resist the urge to harden your heart. Discernment is not the same as distrust. You can remain open while being selective. You can love deeply without abandoning yourself. Emotional maturity does not mean never getting hurt. It means knowing how to respond when you are. A grounded partner chooses alignment over attention. They choose communication over escape. They choose integrity over impulse. These qualities are not rare because people are bad. They are rare because they require self-awareness, discipline, and courage. But they exist, and when you hold these standards calmly, you naturally filter for them. If you are listening to this and feeling that quiet grief, allow it. Grief is not weakness, it is the nervous system processing loss. Do not rush it, do not numb it, breathe through it. Movement, rest, and honest reflection help the body release stored tension. Remember this clearly. You are not defined by the loyalty someone else failed to give. You are defined by how you remain aligned with yourself when faced with disappointment. Dignity is not loud, it is steady. It is the quiet decision not to beg for clarity that should be freely given. When someone walks away emotionally, they lose access to your presence, your trust, and your depth. That is not a small loss. Even if they do not realize it immediately, it matters. But again, this is not about them. It is about you returning home to yourself. As you move forward, let understanding replace rumination. Let clarity replace self-blame. Let boundaries replace anxiety. You deserve a connection where emotional safety is mutual, where attention does not have to be competed for, and where loyalty is a shared value, not a constant concern. Take a final breath here. Settle your shoulders. There is nothing wrong with you for wanting depth, consistency, and truth. Those are not weaknesses. They are signs of emotional strength. And when you honor them, you create space for relationships that meet you where you are, without confusion, without fear, and without betrayal.